Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Fun with Maps. I'm your host Dan Hanson, and today we've got a great one. It is a lot of fun, and the story I've got for you at the end is going to be the most fun of all. It's really a good story about one of the countries who we're going to look at in the map today. Today we're going to look at the Horn of Africa. Okay, if you look at the map of Africa, Africa is a huge continent, and over here on the east you have what looks like a horn jutting out here, and we'll take a closer look at that in a couple minutes. But here in the big map, here's Africa. You can see this horn here, and the Horn of Africa, it's a peninsula. A peninsula is just a landmass that's mostly covered, mostly bordered by water, but not completely. So think of like Florida, that's a peninsula. The Horn of Africa is a peninsula because it's surrounded here by the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean, all of that stuff here. So that's a peninsula. Peninsula comes from the Latin word paean, insula, where paean means almost, insula meaning island, so it's almost an island. So the Horn of Africa just hundreds of miles here into the Gulf of Aden, and it separates Africa from this other peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula. So here you've got the Arabian Peninsula, which is the largest peninsula in the world, actually. So you've got this Horn of Africa Peninsula here. Here you've got the Arabian Peninsula separating the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden. The Arabian Peninsula has Yemen and Bahrain and Oman and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait. They're all over here. But we're going to look at the Horn of Africa down here. We're going to look at it in some detail in a second. So let's take a look closer, the Horn of Africa, with Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somalia. Let's have some fun with maps. Okay, so here's a closer look at the Horn of Africa. And here you see the whole continent of Africa here, and in green here, that's the Horn of Africa, okay? Here's the Indian Ocean. All this out here is the Indian Ocean. This is the Gulf of Aden in here. This is the Red Sea. Here's the Arabian Peninsula, which we saw. That's the largest peninsula in the world. The biggest country here is, of course, Saudi Arabia, but you've got Yemen and Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates. But what you can see from this map here, the Horn of Africa here extends hundreds of miles into the Arabian Sea here, and it's so close. The landmass here, this narrow passage, it's the Red Sea into the Gulf of Aden, and up here we'll see when we look a little higher, the Red Sea going into the Suez Canal and then to the Mediterranean to connect Europe. It's amazing. So here's where the geography, the maps show the history here. This is such prime territory and so close here. If this gets shut down, trade from Europe to Asia here would have to go all the way around Africa. This is very important for commerce, for politics, for military, for everything. So this area is so important. Look how close these two are here. So this is the Horn of Africa here. The basic countries, the big one here, of course, is Ethiopia, and we'll get into that some more. There's Eritrea, here's Djibouti, and here's Somalia with that nice long coastline. Okay, so let's take a look. Ethiopia, let's zoom in a little more even. Ethiopia here, it's landlocked. You can see it's got no borders here, and that's so important to have some access to the sea for trade and everything else. So it's the most populous landlocked country in the world. It's the second most populous nation in the African continent. And we're going to talk about some fun facts about Ethiopia in a couple minutes. This is Eritrea up here, and there's history, they were formed by a combination of kingdoms and sultanates over the years. It became Italian for a while. The Italian colonial army was defeated in the 40s, and the British ruled until 1952. but they wanted to start governing themselves, and they entered into some agreements with Ethiopia, their neighbor here, and for 10 years. In 1962, though, there's an annulment of the Eritrean parliament, and Ethiopia formally annexed Eritrea, but the Eritrean Liberation Front fought them, and there's all kinds of history and politics there. But in 1991, after 30 years of really continuous armed struggle for independence here, Eritrea got their independence from Ethiopia. And you can see why it would be valuable to Ethiopia, which is landlocked here. And Eritrea's got this nice long coastline along the Red Sea. Djibouti is so small here. It's just got about 900,000 people. It's the smallest population in mainland Africa. I always think of the KC and the Sunshine Band song, Shake Your Booty, when I think about Djibouti. Because of its location here, right at the edge of the Red Sea, right at the Gulf of Aden, and just across this little expanse into Yemen in the Arabian Peninsula, it's really a strategic spot for commerce and military and all that. So over here is Somalia. Nice long coastline. Look at the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. They have it's the longest coastline actually in Africa's mainland. And you can understand, you've probably heard over the years about pirates, Somali pirates, because it's so, with that long coastline, the geography just makes it possible for capturing all this trade that comes through the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean. But lately, the hijacking of commercial vessels is under control. There's an anti-piracy coalition. The Somali government was involved, and the Indian Navy, the Russian Navy, and others. They pretty much stopped that. So, but you can see Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somalia all have the coastline of the Horn of Africa, whereas Ethiopia is landlocked. And of course, over here, it's not really in the Horn, but Ethiopia is bordered by Kenya here as well, and South Sudan and Sudan. Sudan is Africa's third largest country. It's actually the third largest country in the Arab world too. And before 2011, South Sudan down here split off. They seceded from Sudan, but before that, the combined Sudan, South Sudan was the largest country in Africa and largest country in the Arab world by area. So that's a closer look at the Horn of Africa in the map here. You can see just how close that is, how precious that space is, how valuable that connection from the Red Sea coming from the Mediterranean to the Gulf of Aden into the Indian Ocean to all the India and China and all of that. So Ethiopia is interesting for many reasons, as we've seen already, but one thing is if you're one of those people who need your coffee fix every day, Ethiopia is the place of origin of the coffee bean. So coffee bean was grown there. It was first cultivated at Kifa. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So coffee from Ethiopia. Another thing, if you go to Ethiopia or if you go to an Ethiopian restaurant here in the U.S., which is more likely, it's basically a fork-free zone. Don't expect to have, knife, fork, and spoon like we do for most of our meals. Ethiopian food is eaten with a spongy bread called Injera instead of silverware. So what you do, you kind of break off a piece of the Injera and you scoop up the food. The food is usually on a communal plate, and you scoop up some of the food politely, the things in front of you, not reaching across, and use the Injera to pick it up, scoop it, and put it in your mouth. It's also very important to eat with your right hand. Scoop the food with the Injera bread with your right hand, because the left hand is considered unclean in Ethiopian culture. So here's a picture of some Injera. You can see it's got it's spongy and it rolls up like this, and often the food is placed right on it and you break it off and eat it, and it's really a good time. If you get a chance to visit a Ethiopian restaurant, definitely do it. There's a few really good ones here in Cleveland. But now for what I think is the most fun part of this episode, and that's got to do with a fossil, believe it or not. So Ethiopia is considered one of the earliest sites of the emergence of the modern human, Homo sapien. So there's been a lot of important finds in Ethiopia. They're at the forefront of paleontology. The oldest hominid discovered in Ethiopia is about 4.2 million years old, somewhat nicknamed Ardi. But there's this one we're looking at here is the most well-known probably. And it was found by a group led by paleoanthropologist Donald Joe Hanson of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History back in '74 in the Awash Valley of Ethiopia's Afar region. It's one of the most complete and best preserved adult such fossils ever uncovered. And it was named, they named these things scientifically. It was AL2881 or something like that. But locally, the Ethiopians, in their language, which was Amharic, Ahmaric, they called it Dinkinesh. Dinkinesh translates to "you are marvelous." So that's pretty fun. You are marvelous. So when they came across this, the excavation took several weeks. They went back to camp the first night, and they're sitting around and they're celebrating, and they had some tunes cranking, and one of the songs that was on the tape player and kind of in a continuous loop playing over and over and over was the Beatles playing "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds." So they decided that night, let's name this fossil Lucy. And it caught on, and the whole world knows about Lucy. It's world famous. They brought it back to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, stabilized it, constructed it. About 9 years later, sent it back here to Ethiopia, and the whole world knows about Lucy. So now you know about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and this famous fossil. So now you know about the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia. And you learned an Amharic word, Dinkinesh. Amharic is the language of Ethiopia. Dinkinesh, remember, means "you are marvelous." So you can impress your friends with that one. But the most fun, like we said, is knowing how why that fossil was named Lucy and the connection with the Beatles and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So that's it for this episode of Fun with Maps. Come back, join us next time. In the meantime, keep having fun with maps. See ya.